Have you watched the news recently or gone on social media and just looked at some of the things that are happening in our world? There seems to be a lot of bad news. Just anywhere you look, it seems to be things are happening that are so discouraging and disappointing. I guess that's the nature of life in a fallen, broken world. But we need some good news. When Revelation was written, probably at the end or near the end of the first century, there were Christians who were dealing with bad news every day. They weren't just seeing it on their social media feeds or on the news, they were living it. There was bad news around them because they were being persecuted and they were facing all kinds of problems because they chose to declare Christ as Lord rather than Caesar as Lord. And because of that decision of faithfulness and commitment as disciples and followers of Christ, they were ostracized, they were mistreated, they were persecuted. There was lots of bad news. They needed a good word. They needed some good news. Well, we see chapter 4 of Revelation, and we see more bad news coming. This door is opened into the throne room of heaven. We see this beautiful vision of God seated on his throne, and everything there is worshiping him. God is holding something. He's holding a scroll with 7 seals on it. And here's the bad news. No one is available to open the scroll. If it is potentially a message of hope, if it is good news, much needed good news, if it is what is happening now, an explanation of what is happening now in light of what is to come, an assurance about what is to come, if it is all those things, then it needs to be heard. It needs to be seen. But no one can open the scroll. I have a feeling if some of us would have been there, we would have volunteered. Well, give me a try at it. Let me see if I can open it. Much like when someone needs help opening a jar, let me just see if I can get that open. But the truth is, none of us is strong enough. None of us is good enough. None of us certainly is holy enough to open the scroll. We are unworthy to open the sovereign scroll, the sacred plan of God, the divine plan of God. As Romans 3 reminds us, there is no one righteous. We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Just that perspective helps us see the chasm, the difference between us, we who are unholy, and God who is holy, seated on the throne, receiving worship. And as we're trying to get our mind around that great chasm, that difference, suddenly we have good news. There is good news in this vision to John. There is someone available. There is someone who can open the scroll. Who is it? It is the Lion of Judah, the long-awaited Messiah. He is the only one worthy to open the scroll, to take off the seals, to open the seals, to reveal the message of God, the plan of God. He is the one. That's what John hears. But when he looks, he sees something a little bit different. He hears that the Lion of Judah is the one, but when he looks, it is a lamb that takes the scroll. And not just any lamb, it is a lamb that appears to be slain. Stop and think about that for a minute. A lion, powerful, forceful, strong. A lamb that was slain, sacrificial, servant-minded. Those two images capture so much of the character and the nature of Jesus, and also life in his kingdom. Think about that for a little bit. Discuss that in your time together. What do these two images of Jesus reveal about him and about the nature of his kingdom and life in his kingdom? The Lamb is the one who is worthy to open the seals, to open the scroll. And when that news is shared, it is good news. It is great news. And there is much rejoicing. We see in chapter 5 of Revelation that everyone there begins to worship the Lamb of God. They began to sing and declare his worthiness. I think there is much we can learn from that scene. You see, when we worship, our gaze is lifted from our lives and our needs and our circumstances up to God, to who he is, to his goodness. You see, our focus goes from all the bad news here in our life and around us and our world to all the goodness and the glory of God. As worship soars, worry sinks. Hopelessness fades. When we focus on God, we tend not to focus so much on ourselves. There's a lesson there for us. What does it mean to worship? What does it mean to humbly bow down before God? That's what that word means. It means to bow down or to lower yourself. Think about how we worship as Christians today. Think about what worship is. Worship is what we do when we come together on Sunday, but isn't worship more than that? So how do we worship? What does it mean to worship? One thing never changes, and that is God is the object of our worship. There is only one who is worthy, and that is God the Father and the Lamb of God, the one who sacrificed everything to give us hope and life, to give us good news when there seems to be so much bad news in our world. And so think about what it means to worship Him. And not just the forms of worship, but to have the heart of worship. Go back and read some of the Psalms and think about how worship focuses on the goodness and the glory of God. And see if there are some things that we can do, that you can do, as a worshiper of God, as one who exalts the Lamb of God. How can we worship with all of our hearts? When worship soars, worry sinks.